Thanks for joining us today as we continue to read the second half of Chapter 30 in Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. We're here at the Caribou Public Library, and I am Miss Erin. We're here for our chapter book story time. So thanks for joining us. So, Amy has been working diligently at a fair, at a table with some folks, giving her time and her energy and not being treated very well. So Jo has a plan, and they are going to help her out the next day. So Jo is talking with Laurie about it. Didn't Hayes give you the best of our gardens? I told him to. I didn't know that. He forgot, I suppose, and as your grandpa was poorly, I didn't like to worry him by asking, though I did want some. Now, Jo, how could you think there was any need of asking? They're just as much yours as mine. Don't we always go halves in everything? Began Laurie, in the tone that always made Jo turn thorny. Gracious, I hope not. Half of some of your things wouldn't suit me at all. But we mustn't stand philandering here. I've got to help Amy. So you go and make yourself splendid. And if you'll be so very kind as to let Hayes take a few nice flowers up to the hall, I'll bless you forever. Couldn't you do it now? Asked Laurie, so suggestively that Jo shut the gate in his face with inhospitable haste and called through the bars, Go away, Teddy, I'm busy. Thanks to the conspirators, the tables were turned that night, for Hayes sent up a wilderness of flowers, with a lovely basket arranged in his best manner for a centerpiece. Then the March family turned out en masse, and Jo exerted herself to some purpose, for people not only came, but stayed, laughing at her nonsense, admiring Amy's taste, and apparently enjoying themselves very much. Laurie and his friends gallantly threw themselves into the breach, bought up the bouquets, encamped before the table, and made that corner the liveliest spot in the room. Amy was in her element now, and, out of gratitude if nothing more, was as sprightly and gracious as possible, coming to the conclusion about that time that virtue was its own reward, after all. Jo behaved herself with exemplary propriety, and when Amy was happily surrounded by her guard of honor, Jo circulated about the hall, picking up various bits of gossip which enlightened her upon the subject of the Chester change of base. She reproached herself for her share of the ill feeling, and resolved to exonerate Amy as soon as possible. She also discovered what Amy had done about the things in the morning, and considered her a model of magnanimity. As she passed the art table, she glanced over it for her sister's things, but saw no signs of them. Tucked away out of sight, I dare say, thought Jo, who could forgive her own wrongs, but hotly resented any insult offered to her family. Good evening, Miss Jo. How does Amy get on? Asked May with a conciliatory air, for she wanted to show that she could also be generous. She sold everything that she had that was worth selling, and now she's enjoying herself. The flower table is always attractive, you know, especially to gentlemen. Jo couldn't resist giving that little slap, but May took it so meekly she regretted it in a minute, and fell to praising the great vases, which still remained unsold. Is Amy's illumination anywhere about? I took a fancy to buy that for Father, said Jo, very anxious to learn the fate of her sister's work. Everything of Amy's sold long ago. I took care that the right people saw them, and that made nice little sum of money for us, returned May, who had overcome sundry small temptations as well as Amy that day. Much gratified, Jo rushed back to tell the good news, and Amy looked both touched and surprised by the report of May's words and manner. Now, gentlemen, I want you to go and do your duty by the other tables as generously as you have by mine, especially the art table, she said, ordering out Teddy's own, as the girls called the college friends. Charge, Chester, charge, is the motto for that table, but do your duty like men, and you'll get your money's worth of art in every sense of the word, said the irrepressible Jo, as the devoted phalanx prepared to take the field. To hear is to obey, but March is fairer far than May, said little Parker, making a frantic effort to be both witty and tender, and getting promptly quenched by Laurie, who said, Very well, my son, for a small boy, and walked him off with a paternal pat on the head. By the vases, whispered Amy to Laurie, as a final heaping of coals of fire on her enemy's head. To May's great delight, Mr. Lawrence not only bought the vases, but pervaded the hall with one under each arm. The other gentlemen speculated with equal rashness in all sorts of frail trifles, and wandered helplessly about afterwards, burdened with wax flowers, painted fans, filigree portfolios, and other useful and appropriate purchases. Aunt Carrol was there, heard the story, looked pleased, and said something to Mrs. March in a corner, which made the latter lady beam with satisfaction, and watch Amy with a face full of mingled pride and anxiety, though she did not betray the cause of her pleasure until several days later. The fair was pronounced a success, and when May bid Amy good night, she did not gush as usual, but gave her an affectionate kiss and a look which said, "Forgive and forget." That satisfied Amy, and when she got home she found the vases paraded on the parlor chimney-piece, with a great bouquet in each. "The reward of merit for a magnanimous march," as Laurie announced with a flourish. "You've a deal more principle and generosity and nobleness of character than I ever gave you credit for, Amy. You've behaved sweetly, and I respect you with all my heart," said Jo warmly, as they brushed their hair together late that night. "Yes, we all do, and love her for being so ready to forgive. It must have been dreadfully hard after working so long, and setting your heart on selling your own pretty things. I don't believe I could have done it as kindly as you did," added Beth from her pillow. "Why, girls, you needn't praise me so. I only did as I'd been done by. You laugh at me when I say I want to be a lady, but I mean a true gentlewoman in mind and manners, and I try to do it as far as I know how. I can't explain exactly, but I want to be above the little meanness and follies and faults that spoil so many women. I'm far from it now, but I do my best and hope in time to be what Mother is." Amy spoke earnestly, and Jo said, with a cordial hug, "I understand now what you mean, and I'll never laugh at you again. You are getting on faster than you think, and I'll take lessons of you in true politeness, for you've learned the secret, I believe. Try away, dearie. You'll get your reward some day, and no one will be more delighted than I shall." A week later, Amy did get her reward, and poor Jo found it hard to be delighted. A letter came from Aunt Carrol, and Mrs. March's face was illuminated to such a degree when she read it, that Jo and Beth, who were with her, demanded what the glad tidings were. "Aunt Carrol is going abroad next month, and wants—" "Me to go with her!" burst in Jo, flying out of a chair in an uncontrollable rapture. "No, dear, not you. It's Amy." "Oh, Mother, she's too young. It's my turn first. I've wanted it so long. It would do me so much good, and be so altogether splendid. I must go." "I'm afraid it's impossible, Jo. Aunt says Amy, decidedly, and it is not for us to dictate when she offers such a favor." "It's always so. Amy has all the fun, and I have all the work. It isn't fair. Oh, it isn't fair!" cried Jo passionately. "I'm afraid it is partly your own fault, dear. When Aunt spoke to me the other day, she regretted your blunt manners and too independent spirit. Here she writes, as if quoting something you had said, 'I planned at first to ask Jo, but as favors burden her, and she hates French, I think I won't venture to invite her. Amy is more docile and will make a good companion for Flo, and receive gratefully any help that the trip may give her.'" Oh, my tongue, my abominable tongue! Why can't I learn to keep it quiet?" groaned Jo, remembering the words which had been her undoing. When she had heard the explanation of the quoted phrases, Mrs. March said sorrowfully, "I wish you could have gone, but there is no hope of it this time, so try to bear it cheerfully. Don't sadden Amy's pleasure by reproaches or regrets." "I'll try," said Jo, winking hard, as she knelt down to pick up the basket she had joyfully upset. "I'll take a leaf out of her book, and try not only to seem glad, but to be so, and not grudge her 1 minute of happiness. But it won't be easy, for it is a dreadful disappointment," and poor Jo bedewed the little fat pincushion she held, with several very bitter tears. "Jo, dear, I'm very selfish, but I couldn't spare you, and I'm glad you ain't going quite yet," whispered Beth, embracing her, basket and all, with such a clinching touch and loving face that Jo felt comforted in spite of the sharp regret that made her want to box her own ears and humbly beg Aunt Carrol to burden her with this favor, and see how gratefully she would bear it. By the time Amy came in, Jo was able to take her part in the family jubilation, not quite as heartily as usual, perhaps, but without repinings at Amy's good fortune. The young lady herself received the news as tidings of great joy, went about in a solemn sort of rapture, and began to sort her colors and pack her pencils that evening, leaving such trifles as clothes, money, and passports to those less absorbed in visions of art than herself. "It isn't a mere pleasure trip to me, girls," she said impressively, as she scraped her best palette. "I will decide my career, for if I have any genius, I shall find it out in Rome, and will do something to prove it." "Suppose you haven't," said Jo, sewing away, with red eyes at the new collars which were being handed over to Amy. "Then I shall come home and teach drawing for my living," replied the aspirant for fame, with philosophic composure. But she made a wry face at the prospect and scratched away at her palette as if bent on vigorous measures before she gave up her hopes. "No, you won't. You hate hard work, and you'll marry some rich man and come home to sit in the lap of luxury all your days," said Jo. "Your predictions sometimes come to pass, but I don't believe that one will. I'm sure I wish it would, for if I can't be an artist myself, I should like to be able to help those who are," said Amy, smiling, as if the part of Lady Bountiful would suit her better than that of a poor drawing teacher. Said Jo with a sigh. "If you wish it, you'll have it, for your wishes are always granted. Mine, never." "Would you like to go?" asked Amy, thoughtfully flattening her nose with her knife. "Rather. Well, in a year or two I'll send for you, and we'll dig in the forum for relics and carry out all the plans we've made so many times." "Thank you. I'll remind you of your promise when that joyful day comes, if it ever does," returned Jo, accepting the vague but magnificent offer as grateful as she could. There was not much time for preparation, and the house was in a ferment until Amy was off. Jo bore up very well until the last flutter of blue ribbon vanished. Then she retired to her refuge, the garret, and cried until she couldn't cry any more. Amy likewise bore up stoutly until the steamer sailed. Then, just as the gangway was about to be withdrawn, it suddenly came over her that a whole ocean was soon to roll between her and those who loved her best, and she clung to Laurie, the last lingerer, saying with a sob, "Oh, take care of them for me, and if anything should happen—" "I will, dear, I will. If anything happens, I'll come and comfort you," whispered Laurie, little dreaming how soon he would be called upon to keep his word. So Amy sailed away to find the old world, which is always new and beautiful to young eyes, while her father and friend watched her from the shore, fervently hoping that none but gentle fortunes would befall the happy-hearted girl, who waved her hand to them until they could see nothing but the summer sunshine dazzling on the sea. And that is it for today. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.